Greetings and welcome. I am Jack, and this is a beginner's guide for the Pathfinder 2nd edition Druid, where we try to learn the Druid class by theory crafting a build from character level 1 to level 20. So I am going to start by presenting a brief overview of the class, then I'm going to present the character concept, and then I will describe the build from level 1 to level 20. What I usually do in these videos is then present a damage projection if I'm dealing with a martial character, or if I'm dealing with a spellcaster, I present a spellcasting snapshot. However, for the druid, and in particular for this druid, both these information are relevant. I also noticed that my spellcaster videos tend to be longer, so I will split this video in two to make it more digestible. So in this first part, we are going to just present the build from level 1 to level 20. And in the next video, we are going to see the damage projection of the build and its spell selection every 5 levels. Before we start, I want to thank Gortle's Guide to the Druid and Steele's Guide to the Wild Shape Druid for teaching me the basics of the class, as well as RPG Bot's Druid Handbook. I also want to thank Gortle's spell guide to help me navigate the primal spell list. With that being said, we've got a lot to talk about today, so let's get right into the class. The Druid is a nature spellcaster who is a mixture between the wizard and the cleric. They possess the ability to cast blasty spells, usually themed around the natural elements, kind of like a wizard, but they also have a bit of support and healing usually in the spellcasting selection. In Pathfinder 2nd edition, this is exemplified by the primal spell list, which contains a bit of all of these things. It is a bit of a mirror of the occult spell list which we saw for the bard, in the sense that just like the bard has a lot of spells and effects which focuses on illusion, mind trickery, and in general stuff that targets will saving throws, at the expense of damage dealing, so does the primal spell list have a lot of effects which do damage in an area, fireballs, lightning, that kind of stuff, but lacks mental effects and illusions, things that are the bread and butter of the occult spell list. Druids are prepared spellcasters, and they are similar to clerics in the sense that they also get some martial proficiencies, pretty decent hit die, proficiency with armor, although metal armor is anathema to all druids, and in general a bunch of class feats and features that seem to support a Gish kind of build, so a build which goes both in melee and fights and casts spells. Druid subclasses are called orders, and many of the druid features are scattered around in these orders. Each order gives you training in a particular skill as well as a focus spell, and they also have an associated feat. For example, the animal order gives you training in athletics, gives you an animal companion through a feat, and a focus spell to heal this animal companion. Only druids of the animal order get this. Other orders focus more on effects that enhance your damage or defenses or provide some utility. This is not to say that druids are very specialized, quite the contrary really, because all druids have at level 2 access to a feat that allows them to dip into other orders to gain their feat, which means that druid can potentially be members of every single order because this feat can be taken multiple times. So you can really tailor your druid to be the kind of character that you want. A notable thing about these orders is that the most iconic druid feature is locked behind the Order of the Wild, and this feature is Wild Shape, the ability to turn into an animal and other kind of creatures at higher level. Wild Shape is a very powerful ability because usually there are very few problems that the game presents to you that cannot be solved by creatively turning into an animal. It is also very fun to do, both for scouting purposes. After all, nobody usually minds a fly or a rat if they are discreet enough. And there is nothing more satisfactory than turning into a giant bear and mauling down enemies that thought you were just weak and defenseless, like the wizard. Since in this video we are going to heavily lean into Wild Shape because I love this feature, let's see a bit more in detail how this is implemented in Pathfinder 2nd edition. Now, the Wild Shape feat gives you access to the Wild Shape Focus spell. The Wild Shape Focus spell is a focus spell which replicates the effect of other level spells which are battle forms. Now, the first thing to note about these spells is that they all have the polymorph tag. This means that, first of all, you can only be under the effect of one polymorph effect at a time, and also, most importantly, unless otherwise stated, while you are polymorphed, you cannot speak, you cannot use manipulate actions or activate items, and you cannot cast spells. This is a big drawback for a class which is a primary spellcaster. So what do you get out of your Wild Shape? Well, at low level, you just get Pest form. This is not a battle form. This changes your stats, it makes you more vulnerable to physical damage, but it allows you to become tiny, and being an inconspicuous animal is certainly very good to maybe reach areas which are harder for a human being to get to. However, of course, the most appealing part of Wild Shape is the ability to fight while being an animal, and this is something that happens at higher level. The first combat form you have access to is animal form, so let's take a deeper look at it and see how that works. So animal form is actually a second level spell which costs 2 action to cast, as most spells do. It lasts for 1 minute and it turns you into a particular animal. These animals are divided in categories depending on their general shape. So you have, for example, the cat shape, which might include felines like tigers, panthers, and maybe even a kitten, though from the damage it deals, it's probably a very mean kitten. Regardless of the form you choose, you always get the same amount of armor class, a static 16 plus your level. You also get a small amount of temporary hit points to improve your survivability. Sometimes you get some senses, depending on the shape you form, and then you get attacks. Now, this is a very important part. Your attack modifier is a static +9, and also your damage bonus is a static +1. Doesn't matter who you are, what your stats are, these modifiers replace your stats. The same happens to athletics. Interestingly, your actual ability scores do not change, so you might have a strength of 8, and you still would have a strength of 8 while wild-shaped into an animal. Conversely, if you had for some reason a strength of 18 and you wild-shaped into a chicken, you would still be an incredibly strong chicken. And you could potentially burst down doors, because animal form and all forms from wild shape still allow you to use your own modifier for athletics checks. So you can be a fly which carries around in flight your barbarian companion. An interesting thing about wild shape is that while it replicates exactly the spell animal form, it has an added benefit. If you choose to use your own attack modifier instead of that provided by the form default attack modifier, then you get a +2 status bonus to attack rolls. This means that as a druid, you are presented with 2 choices. You can either completely dump strength and use the attack modifier of the battle form, or you can invest it into it and then benefit from this +2 status bonus. This brings you closer to the attack bonus of martials, with the side effect of not being able to benefit from status bonuses. If, for example, you have a bard or somebody who can cast heroism, you would not be able to gain much advantage from it because you already have a status bonus. Then again, that kind of bonus is almost certainly more beneficial for an actual martial than it is for a druid. So when we consider all of these aspects of wild shape, it becomes obvious that this is an amazing focus spell. Usually focus spells are somewhat weaker than leveled spells, and the reason for that is pretty obvious. You can cast leveled spells only once per day, and then you have to do your daily preparations again to regain your spell slots. However, to regain focus spells, you just need to refocus. 10 minutes of downtime and you're good to go. So Wild Shape makes it so you can spam leveled spells. And it doesn't just copy those spells, it has this added effect, the potential additional status bonus. So it's a better version of the spell every other spellcaster gets access to. Lastly, the other aspect of Wild Shape, which is immensely powerful, is the fact that as you level up, as you get more feats, Wild Shape can be used to replicate higher level combat forms. you can turn into elementals, you can turn into monstrosities, you can turn into actual dragons. And all the while, you still have the versatilities of turning into every single animal you can think of. Wild shape, though, isn't all sunshine and rainbows. There are some pretty hefty drawbacks. As I said, the main one, you are not able to cast spells while in wild shape. And you are a primary spellcaster, so that's a pretty big drawback. The other disadvantage is it's a 2-action spell. So if this is your primary battle mode, the main way you are planning to deal damage, if you compare yourself to a martial, what they will do, somebody like a barbarian will on the first turn of combat do something like rage, which is 1 action. Another martial, like a fighter, might enter a stance, that is also 1 action. This leaves them 2 action to strike twice if the enemy is already there, or do something perhaps like a sudden charge, so stride twice and then strike. However, for a druid, wild shaping costs 2 actions, so this means they only have 1 action left to attack. This means that their first turn of combat will always inherently be worse than any other actual martial. And this is before considering they cannot start with an 18 in strength, so their attack bonus will always inevitably be lower. They also have slower gains of proficiency when compared to martial classes as it should be. So is wild shape overpowered? Is it bad? Is it just okay? Well, answering these questions is kind of like the objective of today's video, as we will see in the following section. So I don't have a strong character concept for this build. All I want to do is I want to use wild shape. I think there are 2 approaches for character creation. Either you have a character concept, so I want to play Batman, and then you try and find a class and some abilities that allow you to play that kind of character. Or you read the class and you see a feature and you say, oh my god, this feature is amazing, I want to play around it, and then you build a character around that feature. Today we are doing the latter, and if there is a class feature worthy of having a character built around it, that is certainly wild shape. Polymorphing, at least to me, is incredibly fun and satisfactory, and it looks like Pathfinder gives a lot more freedom to the druid. Your daily limit of wild shape is a lot higher. There is a constant gain throughout character development of different animal forms that you keep obtaining. You're not just done as long as you hit a certain challenge rating of animals and then you stop finding animals. You don't need to have seen these animals, so you can turn literally into whatever you want. So I cannot wait to experiment with this feat. Now, in previous videos, I was sometimes tempted to do Gish characters. For example, the Bard had a Warrior Muse, which kind of seemed to suggest that the Bards could be used in melee, but I think that's kind of a trap. The Cleric as a whole subclass, the War Cleric, built around the idea of being in melee. And something I think I learned while making a Cleric build is that at low level, that is a pretty appealing proposition. Still, with my Cleric build, I decided not to go that route and just stay full spellcaster as much as possible. With the Druid, I am going to try and make a Gish, so a character who both fights in melee and casts spells, although immediately it's clear that I will not be able to do these 2 things at the same time, because if I am fighting in melee while being polymorphed, then my spells are not an option. Still, my goal is to take as many feats from archetype feats and from class feats to enhance my wild shape, try and push my damage as high as possible, and at the end of the day see if I can rival with martial classes while also maintaining all the benefits of a full spellcaster. So with that being said, let's get into the actual build. Good starting hit points, and the biggest downfall of being a dwarf, which is the low speed, is kind of offset by the fact that we are wild shaping, and so we override this speed. So if your dungeon master does not want you to take uncommon ancestries, this is a very good option. However, I'm going to go for the orc. This has the same high amount of hit points and has some better, arguably, starting feats. For the heritage, we could go for the whole scarred orc for even more starting hit points. I am, however, going to choose an uncommon heritage, and in particular the Duskwalker heritage. Again, there are feats in here that I would like to take. For our background, we are a wisdom character, so it seems reasonable to invest in medicine and get a background that can help us with that. Field Medic is the go-to option. This gives us training in medicine and the battle medicine feat right at level 1. So what is the story of our character? Well, maybe we were a member of an orc raiding party. We were the medic in the party, and we were all slaughtered by adventurers. But we alone came back, or maybe we just had a near-death experience, and when we came back we saw all our friends and companions dead. So we decided to retire in a secluded grove and there bury our companions and spend the rest of our lives meditating on the cycle of death and rebirth. And this is how we became druids. So at level 1 we also have to choose our ability scores. We are a wisdom based character, so we'll try and put wisdom whenever we can. We also want a bit of strength because we will be going in melee, and a bit of dexterity as well. So if we then allocate our free boosts to strength and dexterity, we can start with 14 in both. This will be relevant for our archetypes later on. A bit of constitution, and of course 18 in wisdom. We don't get many skills. Athletics might come in handy, and we are not a charismatic character, so this is the first time I don't take intimidation. Charisma is our dump stat. Instead, I can finally feature a very powerful feat that we as druids are uniquely suited to exploiting, and that skill is stealth. We want to be scouts, and we want to be sneaky sometimes, so that will certainly help. For our ancestry feat, the reason why I chose the orc background is that this allows us to take the orc ferocity feat. This is a reaction we can use once per day, and this allows us to avoid being knocked out and instead remain at 1 hit point whenever we would be reduced to 0 hit points. So this can help us remain in our wild shape. We can then morph out of it and maybe cast an healing spell, or just use the superior speed of the wild shape to get out of trouble. For our starting order, we could go with the Wild Order. We want Wild Shape after all, and this would give us that. It will also give us the order spell Wild Morph. This is like Wild Shape Light and allows us to gain for 1 minute some minor bonuses to melee attacks, like claw attacks that deal slashing damage. It doesn't seem like something we are really interested in using. It seems something maybe more useful for a martial class who takes druid as archetype. I think the most powerful option you can take at this level is instead the Animal Order. This will give you access to an animal companion and a focus spell which you can use to heal it. So you can have 2 bodies on the battlefield. Your average turn can be to cast a 2-action cantrip and then command your animal companion, who will get 2 actions to stride or strike twice. It will be helpful to draw attention away from you. We are not ready to wade in melee just yet. And it can support the other martials in the team. And the animal companion is so good that we could actually stick with it. However, it has kind of diminishing returns, and later on it is very demanding with respect to the class feats it requires. And as we will see, class feats is really something we are starved for in this build. So eventually we are going to drop our animal companion and get something else. The optimal choice, I think, is to retrain out of it. So even if the animal companion dies, you don't have to waste 1 week to get it back, but you can just retrain into a different order. However, if you want to avoid retraining, you can start with the order we ultimately want right at the beginning. And that order is the Leaf Order. The Leaf Order gives us an extra focus point because of the way it's written, and it allows us to cast the Good Berry focus spell, which is not as broken as it is in 5th edition. Well, it's not really that broken. It is broken, I guess, if your DM is trying to run a campaign where you have limited resources for survival, like Hunger Games, then it's broken, but it's okay. And in Pathfinder, it's okay as well. It provides you a 1d6 plus 4 hit points of healing, which you can distribute. You can precast it before combat and distribute among your companions. And this, of course, scales. So this is a nice in-combat or out-of-combat healing. Most importantly, we get a Leshy Familiar. So let's see what a Familiar does. A Familiar is this blank slate which you can fill with familiar abilities. Usually, familiar are animals, like mice, owls, snakes, whatever. These abilities are very varied, and they can give particular movement types to your familiar, like burrow. They can give particular senses, like dark vision. They can improve the defenses of your familiar, though familiars are not really an asset in combat. It can also give them the ability to act without you needing to command them. Familiars are minions. If you don't command them, which is you spend one action, they get no actions. But if you do command them, then your action gets turned into 2 actions for your familiar. And you can give them a bunch of useful things like manual dexterity, which allows them to interact with physical objects, and the ability to speak. And they can also be used to enhance your spellcasting by, for example, giving you access to additional cantrips or giving you the ability to recharge your focus spells. The best thing about familiars is that the choice of these abilities is not fixed. You can change it every time you change your daily preparations, so you can really tailor your familiar to meet your daily needs. In particular, I think familiars are very convenient for us wild-shaping folk, because we can give them an ability which is called touch telepathy. This gives them the ability to, well, as you would imagine, communicate telepathically with creatures by touching them. And if we also give them the speech ability, then the familiar will be able to speak any language we know. So this means that while we are wild-shaped into anything that cannot speak, we can have the familiar sit on our heads, and then we can speak through it. Later on, we will gain additional familiar abilities. So other notable abilities that I would consider are familiar focus, to gain an extra focus point if we really need to wild shape and for some reason we are out of focus points, or if we need extra casts of Goodberry, we can use that. Restorative familiar is also a very nice familiar ability. With one command action, our familiar gets 2 actions, and it can use it once per day to heal us a little bit. It kind of increases our survivability. It can be very convenient. Eventually, at higher level, I would swap one of these 4 abilities for spell casting. This allows our familiar to cast a spell which is at least 5 levels lower than our highest level spell slot. So eventually our familiar can cast up to 4th level spells. This effectively gives us an extra spell slot. But it's not just that, it allows us to cast 2 spells in one round, because we can command our familiar and they will get 2 actions to cast the spell. This will leave us with 2 more actions that we can use to cast our own spell, which seems pretty nice. So as you can see, the familiar does really a lot for us, and it doesn't really require that much from feats. We will just take a single feat later on to give it extra familiar abilities. Then we can really tailor and change it on the fly. Maybe we can have our scouting companion if we need it. So thanks to our orc heritage, we get dark vision. We also have our druidic feature, wild empathy, and we get the shield block free feat. So right now we will not be wild shaping in combat, so if we want to start with a shield and use this feat, we certainly can. Alright, that was a very long level 1. Let's move on to level 2. The class feat we are going to take is Order Explorer. This allows us to dip into another order, and of course this is where we take our wild order. This means we do not get Wild Morph as a focus spell, but it wasn't really that good of a spell, so that's not too bad. But we do finally get Wild Shape, so right now we can use it to turn into pests, so we can only use pest form. We get our first free archetype, and thanks to our clever stat distribution, we have access to the fighter dedication. We have 14 both in strength and dexterity. Right now, the fighter dedication is not doing much for us, except giving us an extra skill training in acrobatics. But at level 4, this will prove instrumental in buffing our build. We get our first skill feat, and I think here is a good spot to take assurance. If you want to use athletics actions, for example, for your 3rd action in combat, to avoid the -10 multiple attack penalty, then you can take assurance in athletics. That is still going to work only if you target enemies with low reflex saving throws, for example if you try to trip them. So it's not a guaranteed way to trip people, it's more of an additional asset which is circumstantially useful. We are, however, focusing on medicine, so I think assurance in medicine is a better choice. There are some circumstances where we want to use our battle medicine and we want to succeed at our medicine check, and eventually we're going to have a high enough modifier that assurance guarantees it. So this is a very powerful asset for us as a battlefield healer, and it's something we want to take right now. Moving on to level 3, we get our first skill increase and we're going to prioritize medicine here. We also get a general feat, and Incredible Initiative is something I usually prioritize. For us, acting before our enemies might allow us to wild shape and get more defensive capabilities, such as our additional temporary hit points. It can also allow us to go first and cast AoE damage spells later on. We get Alertness, which improves our perception, and Greater Fortitude, which improves our proficiency in Fortitude saves. This is also the level where Wild Shape upgrades to Animal Form. I already briefly covered it in the introduction of the video, so I'm not going to go back on all the things this does. But it does provide us some battle forms we can use. The K9 looks pretty good. It is very fast. It deals reasonable amounts of damage. If we want reach, we can go for the Frog, a little bit less damage, but maybe we are safer while being a frog. We can swim if we need to, and we can climb as an ape. So a lot of utility already. This combined with pest form can really help us solve a lot of problems and do a lot of cool and interesting things. At level 4, we get a class feat to improve our wild shape. That feat is Form Control, and we can take it because we have 14 in strength. So maybe even druids that are not planning to actually go into melee might want a 14 in strength so that they are able to take this feat. What this feat does is allows you to make your wild shape last for an hour, as long as your wild shape is at least 2 levels lower than your highest level that you can cast. This effectively makes wild shape permanent because during that hour you can then refocus. There is a minimum of first level when you use this feature, so we can use it right now with pest form. We can be permanently a rat or a lizard, which is great, of course, for scouting. You could be tempted to use this feature to avoid the issue of wild shape costing 2 actions. So instead of having to wild shape and waste 2 actions in the first turn of combat, being thus unable to strike twice or stride and strike like all other marshals who, for example, rage or enter stances do, you are already wild shape, so you don't need to use any actions for that. The problem is this restriction on the level. Being 2 levels lower than normal usually means that you get pretty bad combat stats. So usually the trade-off in worse combat stats is not really worth the action economy efficiency you gain by using form control. Instead, what you want to do is you want to wild shape actively at the start of every combat so you can use your most powerful combat form available. We get a free archetype feat, and this is where our fighter dedication pays off because we get the opportunist feat. This gives us attack of opportunity. This increases our damage by allowing us to make an attack without multiple attack penalty using our reaction. Wild shape forms usually are large in size, if not larger, and have a lot of reach, so it is pretty easy for us to trigger our attacks of opportunity. We get also a skill feat, and here I will keep the skill feats focused on medicine. Continual recovery is essential if you want to use medicine. It reduces the downtime of medicine from 1 hour to 10 minutes, so you can use it basically every time you refocus. And so it allows you to treat wounds to heal out of combat basically at the end of every combat. It's basically essential for out of combat healing, and any medicine user should have this. At level 5, we get a skill increase, and we can keep up with stealth, which is also something we're doing very often when we are scouting. We also get our first ability boost, and we are going to boost the same abilities we chose for the free boosts at level 1, so strength, constitution, wisdom, and dexterity. As we increase our strength, eventually our base attack bonus is going to be better than that provided by Wild Shape, so we are going to be able to choose that and benefit from the +2 enhancement bonus. We also get an ancestry feat, and Orc has a feat which helps boost unarmed attacks. This adds 1d4 persistent bleed damage to all our critical hits with unarmed strikes. This includes the attacks we use while wild shaped, so this is a neat damage bonus. We also get lightning reflexes, increasing our proficiency in reflex saving throws. At level 6, this is where we buff our familiar, because I couldn't find anything that interesting. I wasn't sold on insect shape. I didn't see what insect shape does for you that animal shape doesn't do already, so I didn't take it, and instead I took Enhanced Familiar to gain 2 more familiar abilities. For our free archetype, I tried to increase my survivability by a bit by taking Fighter Resiliency, gaining extra additional hit points. You could, if you wanted to, take Basic Maneuver instead and gain access right now to something like Power Attack, which would allow you to use 2 actions to deliver 1 strike. It might be useful if you're facing enemies with high armor class, where your second strike has low chances of hitting. It's also reasonably good to overcome damage resistance. Or, if you want good action economy efficiency, you can take something like Sudden Charge. This allows you to stride twice and then make a strike. This is not as good for us as it is for other marshals. This is something that a marshal might want to do on turn 1, but we cannot do this on turn 1 because we do not have access to 2 actions because we are wild shaping. I kept it simple and I just took Fighter Resiliency. We get another skill feat which supports medicine, and that skill is Ward Medic. This allows us to treat up to 2 targets when we are using Treat Disease or Treat Wounds, and it scales up together with our proficiency in medicine, eventually allowing us to treat up to 8 targets when we get to legendary proficiency. Level 7, we get an extra skill training and we can increase medicine to master. We also get a general feat. And again, I'm going to try and improve a bit my survivability by taking toughness. We also get expert spellcasting for primal spells. At level 8, we get an amazing class feat, which is Ferocious Shape. This enhances our wild shape immensely. Right now, we have access to dinosaur form, should we want to. So this turns us into a large dinosaur. This can be a Tyrannosaurus Rex, although I think the Triceratops is slightly better. Interestingly here we have a bit of an overlap because the Triceratops deals 1d6 persistent bleed damage on a critical hit. We also have the ability to add 1d4 persistent bleed damage with our Orc ancestry feat. So usually different sources of persistent damage do not stack on an enemy. So this means that if I hit the enemy with a sword that deals 1d6 persistent bleed damage, and then my ally also hits the same enemy with a sword that deals 1d6 persistent bleed, the enemy is not going to take 2d6, but only the highest of the 2 amounts. However, this is true when an enemy is suffering from persistent bleed damage. I'm not sure if this applies if the damage modifiers are applied to a particular attack. So, for example, you are under the effect of 2 spells that modify your damage. If you were under the effect of a spell that adds thunder damage, for example, your base attack would be the damage of your weapon plus whatever the thunder damage is. If you are under 2 effects that boost your thunder damage, so you have a thundering weapon and a spell that gives you extra thunder damage, then I would assume these effects would stack, because these are not bonuses with a particular name that wouldn't stack. These are just 2 differently named spells or effects. So let's say you have a weapon that does 1d8 thunder damage, and then you cast a spell which allows you to deal 1d8 thunder damage with your attacks. I would assume your attack to do 2d8 thunder damage. So is this true of persistent bleed damage? We have 2 different effects. One is our Triceratops polymorph effect, and the other is our ancestry feat. These are both providing us persistent bleed damage on a critical. Does this mean that the persistent damage is totally 1d6 plus 1d4? Or does it mean that they don't stack at all because they're persistent? Or does it mean that they don't stack because you cannot benefit from an ancestry feat while you are wild-shaped? As a DM, I think I would allow these to stack because it's not that much of a damage increase, and spoiler alert, as we will see in the next video, the druid doesn't really deal overpoweredly broken amounts of damage. But this is a nice question to ponder, and I wasn't able to find an answer to this, so let me know what you think about this. Level 8 is not over yet. We also get a free archetype. We could stick with fighter, get more fighter feats. However, there is something great we will be able to get at level 10 if right now we take the Monk Dedication, which again isn't doing much for us right now. It's giving us Powerful Fist, which we don't need. We already are able to deal damage with unarmed attacks when we wild shape. But we do get an extra skill training. Since we are going around like a rogue, maybe having a bit of thievery would be nice. Finally, we get a skill feat. And here you can pick your favorite. You can pick Assurance in Athletics. You can pick Titan Wrestler if you want to make athletics actions against targets larger than you. This basically allows you to target with athletics any creature thanks to our ability to enlarge ourselves with battle forms and our access to pretty good athletics modifiers. The great thing about druids is that we don't need to invest in athletics at all to be good at it, because the modifiers for our battle forms are actually better than our attack modifiers. So if you don't care much about your damage and you just want to grapple and trip, you can certainly do it. In this build, I'm not showcasing it a lot because what I'm focusing is raw damage and see how high we can push that damage. But do not disregard the power of athletics action, in particular as a wild-shaped druid. At level 9, we get another skill increase. We can bring stealth up to master. We also get an ancestry feat, and this is where the Duskwalker heritage comes in handy because it gives us access to spirit strikes, which buffs our strikes, including our unarmed strikes. This adds 1 additional negative damage to living creatures or positive damage to undead. This might be able to trigger weaknesses, so it can be pretty clutch sometimes. There are other ancestries that do similar things, for example the Azimar. I picked the Duskwalker because I think it matched nicely the idea that I had about this character being a shepherd of nature and of death and rebirth, but you can pick other ancestry. This is the only ancestry feat we are going to take from Duskwalker, so it's not really essential. But I liked the flavor of it, and I liked that I could buff a little bit our damage in wild shape. Level 10. Level 10 is a great level. We get ability boosts, and we are going to choose the same: Strength, Constitution, Wisdom, and Dexterity. We also get a class feat, and the class feat we choose is Soaring Shape. This allows us to fly with our wild shape. We can turn into flying animals, we can turn into flying dinosaurs. We also have access to Monk's Flurry. The earliest you can get this is level 10, and we do get it as early as possible, because this gives us the Flurry of Blows action. This allows us to make 2 strikes, unarmed strikes, as 1 action. So all of a sudden our wild shape is not looking that bad anymore, because we can wild shape, turn into something that hopefully has a lot of reach and can target an enemy with 2 strikes without moving. Remember to delay your actions in a clever fashion. If you see the enemy has no ranged attacks and thus has to come to you, you can wait for them to be adjacent to you. Maybe they're targeting you because they think you're a squishy spellcaster and the party healer, and then you turn into a T-Rex and you eat their face, because the T-Rex also knows Kung Fu. We can also take advantage of our increased proficiency in medicine and take advanced first aid. This allows us to use first aid to also counter the frightened and sickened condition. The sickened condition in particular can be quite nasty to get rid of, so this is a powerful asset in our toolkit. Level 11, we get another skill increase, and here we can choose any skill to bring up to legendary proficiency. As I said, I don't think we really need athletics. Our combat form do a decent enough work. So you can choose any skill. You can choose survival if you want to. You can choose religion. Here I went for acrobatics because there are some nice feats for acrobatics at master proficiency. For our general feat, it's that time of the build again. It's the time to take adopted ancestry to pillage dwarf feats. We also get druid weapon expertise, and this is actually relevant for us because we want to use our own attack bonus and not the attack bonus of the wild shape, so we can get the +2 bonus. And this improves our bonus for that purpose. We also get increased proficiency in will saving throws. At level 12. Level 12 seems to be a great level for many builds, and this makes no exception, because level 12 is when we get our dragon shape. Soaring shape is a prerequisite. This is why we took it 2 levels ago. And now we can turn into dragons. Dragons have in general improved combat stats, In particular, they have access to breath attacks. Since we can choose what kind of dragon to turn into, we can tailor our elemental damage to overcome enemy resistances and maybe target enemy weaknesses. We fly, we deal elemental damage, we have reach, we have opportunity attacks. We can also use martial arts because of our monk training. This is simply amazing. The only thing that's missing from this is the ability from other players to ride us into battle. In Pathfinder 2nd edition, players riding other players is just terrible. You lose actions. It's something that the developers obviously don't want you to do, so don't do that. It's bad. But apart from that, this is the best feat I ever saw in the history of feats. We also get a monk archetype feat, and I chose Perfection's Path to improve my saving throws, in particular the fortitude saving throws. We are approaching the point where we get our first legendary skill proficiency, and we want to be prepared for that because we want to take a skill feat which requires legendary proficiency. So we are going to take Swift Sneak, which is a prerequisite for the feat we are targeting. And this is also generally a pretty good feat, which allows us to move at full speed while sneaking. So for our scouting purposes, this is certainly very nice. Level 13, we get another skill increase and we can bring acrobatics up to master. We also get a pretty nice dwarf ancestry feat, which is Telluric Power. This allows us to deal additional damage equal to the number of our weapon damage die, as long as both us and our target are standing on the same earth or stone surface. This seems something that would occur reasonably often. So again, this is a nice damage boost for us. We get increased proficiency in light and medium armor and an armored defense. This doesn't concern us when we are wild shape, but it does concern us when we are out of wild shape. And at this higher level, chances are we are spending some combat encounters never wild shaping because we've got a lot of spells to cast. Something which is, on the other hand, completely useless is weapon specialization. The damage we deal with our wild shape is just fixed and it does not benefit from any damage modifiers, the way I understand it, so this does nothing for us. At level 14, we can get a class feat. You can take, if you want to, Sow Spell to be able to plant a spell and then trigger it as a reaction. This would allow you to cast potentially 3 spells in one round if you can prepare for it. It's a bit circumstantial, but it allows you to set traps. However, I'm going to enhance my wild shape again by taking plant shape. This is something that's going to pay off at higher level, in particular at level 20. Right now, we just get some additional forms to our wild shape. These do not compete with the dragon form. The dragon form is probably the best thing we can do in combat. But, sometimes turning into a tree or something is fun. And again, at level 20, as we will see, this will pay off. We also get our free archetype feat, and I'm going to boost our survivability by taking Monk Resiliency, giving us extra additional hit points. We also get the acrobatics skill feat I was mentioning. For keep up, we can stand up as a free action and avoid triggering reactions. So since we are in combat a lot, we might get tripped. We might get surprised while we're sleeping and need to stand up. So this is in general a convenient skill to have. And we go to level 15, we get our first legendary skill increase. And you could go with medicine, but the legendary feat for stealth is just so good that I'm going to prioritize this right now. We get our penultimate ability boosts, and we're going to stick with our previous abilities: Strength, Constitution, Wisdom, and Dexterity. We get a general feat, and I think, again, trying to address our survivability is important, so I'm going to take Die Hard. We also get Master Proficiency in Primal Spellcasting. Level 16, we could take, and it's available to us, Effortless Concentration. However, I found out that I didn't have many sustained spells at this level, so instead I chose to take Monstrosity Shape. This gives us access to more battle forms. These battle forms do not have the breath weapon that the dragon has, so if you think the breath weapon is going to be more useful, you can still turn into a dragon instead. If you want to deal more damage, you can turn into a purple worm. And if you have enemies that have weakness to fire, maybe being a phoenix is nice. We also get a free archetype feat. Monk Moves gives us a status bonus to our speed. We were able to get this status bonus from a spell called Long Strider, so this effectively is giving us an extra 2nd level spell we can use for something else. It's also giving us 3 extra HP thanks to Monk Resiliency. So it's not that bad. And we also get our legendary skill feat, our first legendary skill feat, and this is Legendary Sneak. This allows us to basically hide in plain sight without cover and without being concealed. It also allows us to avoid notice for free. And this is something we probably want to do because our stealth modifier is higher than our perception modifier, so this will result in higher initiative rolls. It doesn't say anything about size restrictions, so you can be a huge-ass dragon or a fiery phoenix and try to hide in plain sight, which is just ludicrous, but by raw, apparently you can do that. And we move on to level 17, we get a skill increase. And I'm going to now get legendary proficiency in medicine. I'm also going to take ancestry feat, and this is a good point to take the good reliable mountain's stoutness for the extra HP. And we get to level 18. This is where we unlock perfect form control, which we could take thanks to our high strength. This allows us to stay in our wild shape forms when we use form control indefinitely instead of just 1 hour. I don't think this benefit is as good as it first seems because 1 hour of wild shape is effectively permanent wild shape because of our ability to refocus into it. So I will not take this. I will take instead Primal Aegis. This gives us an AoE aura of resistance, which is equal to our wisdom modifier to basically all elemental damage and negative and positive damage. There are spells that do this, but this is not a spell, so we don't need to cast it, we don't need to spend the spell slot, we don't need to do anything. This is just always active, so it seems pretty good. We also get an archetype class feat. I want to take advanced maneuvers at level 10, so I will take basic maneuver here. This is a feat you might have gotten before, if you wanted to. It's power attack. Again, another competitor for this is sudden charge. Pick your favorite. I picked power attack because it's scaling at level 18 to 3 extra damage die. So it's good in the circumstances I was mentioning before. We get a skill feat. Since we are flying around a lot, I think aerobatic mastery is a decent enough option, but again, you can pick whatever you want at this high level. Level 19, we get our last legendary skill increase. We can take any skill proficiency we feel like we need, like survival and religion, or we can boost acrobatics up to legendary, although there isn't much point because we don't get a legendary acrobatics feat and we are not using acrobatics all that much. For our general feat, this is the spot for Canny Acumen. Again, this triggers at level 17, so you might want to retrain at level 17 your 15th level general feat so that you can get this earlier. We could use this to improve our perception for initiative, but we already have pretty good initiative if we use stealth instead. So instead I'm going to buff my fortitude saving throws. We get our legendary spellcaster proficiency, finally, our 10th level spells as well, which means our familiar now can cast 1 4th level spell. And at long last, we end up at level 20 for our final ability boost, which goes to strength, wisdom, and dexterity. Constitution is already kind of maxed, so we take intelligence for the extra skill training, and here I always pick performance because it's fun. We get our capstone ability. We could take Hierophant's Power for the extra 10th level spell slot. I will take instead True Shapeshifter. This actually gives us an extra 10th level spell slot. It's just that that spell can only be Nature Incarnate. So once per day we can use our Wild Shape to replicate the effect of Nature Incarnate, which is a 10th level spell. This is the ultimate battle form. It is a kaiju. Again, unfortunately, this does not have an AoE attack, so there might be some circumstances where being a dragon is more appealing to you. Then again, if you need AoE, you've got spells which are probably better. But the nice thing about this spell is that you can, with plant form, turn into a green man. And what does the green man have that the kaiju doesn't have? Well, the green man is medium. So it's a battle form that can fit into cramped corridors or small rooms. So it's a nice additional asset to our battle forms. We also get a free archetype feat, and this is kind of like a capstone because we get advanced maneuvers, which gives us +3 extra HP, but also the ability to take combat reflexes for an extra attack of opportunity. Again, something which is probably pretty easy to trigger for us, considering how large and how easy our access to reach is. And for our final skill feat, we might as well take the legendary medicine skill, which is legendary medic. If you wanted to get this earlier, you could have gotten this instead of aerobatics mastery. So looking at the character, I realized I've made a mistake because I chose fortitude with canning acumen. I already had it thanks to the monk, so I should have chosen reflex, of course. And now we see we've got some pretty nice saving throws. We've got master proficiency in all our saving throws. And we also have 320 hit points. If we compare this to our barbarian, they had 380 something. And this is before we consider the temporary hit points we gain with our battle forms that can go up to 30. So it's more like 350. Pretty good as far as survivability goes. Our armor class in our ultimate battle form would be 45. We've got a pretty reasonable 36 athletics modifier if we want to use this for attacks. And the versatility that Wild Shape allows us to get, we can turn into literally any animal. We can turn into dinosaurs, we can fly, we can turn into dragons, we can turn into phoenixes and purple worms to burrow, and we can also turn into basically Godzilla. What's missing from this list is elementals. You could have taken that, for example, instead of plant form, if you really like turning into elementals, and there is merit to that argument. If that was the case, then I would probably drop True Shapeshifter for Hierophant power to get an extra 10th level spell. I just wanted to play around a bit with Green Men, but maybe having access to elemental forms is generally more useful than having access to plant forms. The amazing thing about this build is that this looks like a complete build already, and we are not taking into account an important portion of it, which is spellcasting. But if I didn't know that this build has access to full spellcasting, I might be tempted to assume that it actually doesn't. Look at all the things it can already do with the Wild Shape. So as far as our survivability and tankiness, it's nothing exceptional. We are obviously not at the levels of the HP that a barbarian would have. We are not at the levels of the armor class that a champion would have. But we are not completely put to shame. And so the question at this point becomes, how is our damage? And how does our spellcasting complement the rest of the build? And with these two questions, I will leave you. We will answer them in the next video. Until then, I thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.